My name's Will Robin, and we're at Seacliff State Beach here today talking about the SS Palo Alto, our favorite concrete ship. And my question to you is, does concrete float? I mean, here's a chunk of the ship that used to be all one piece until I dropped it, and then that told me how brittle concrete is. So we know it's brittle, we know it's heavy because every time I throw it in the air it falls down, especially if I don't grab it. And here's what we're going to say about concrete. It doesn't float. Just does not float. That chunk of concrete went right down. So how does concrete float is our big issue. How did that concrete ship get there? I want to talk to you about things floating and not floating, and the reasons why. Returning to these three objects similarly sized and very different density, the two that we see actually floating, these two are able to take advantage of what's in the water, what the water has. This guy floats half in and half out. His density, the density of wood is really much less than the concrete, but not as light as the sponge. Wood is something they make a lot of ships out of. It has a buoyancy built in. The buoyancy is in the water. It has some air in it, so it can take advantage of the buoyancy in the water. That's what we need to be able to do. The concrete is so heavy that gravity wins. It can't do anything for buoyancy. We also have a surface area situation. These three have a very similar surface area. They're not exactly the same size, but they're roughly the same shape, and they react very differently as well because of their surface area. Sponge, the whole thing just gets filled with water, but the material's so light that it floats. It doesn't float on top of the water, but it floats. The concrete has maybe a tiny bit less surface area, but it still sinks. The wood actually has the most surface area, that is, everything around the outside of it. So that helps it to float a lot. But the density of the material itself is the most important.
Hi, my name is Liz. I am also a docent here at Seacliff State Beach. Let's get on with the next part of the program. We know that gravity pulls everything down. It pulls you down, it pulls me down, it's pulling the ships at sea down. But water has its own force, and that is called the buoyant force. And it is defined as water's upward push on anything put into it. Water pushes back. So let's take a look at our three bottles here. These bottles are all identical except for the contents. Same manufacturer, same material, same size, same weight, same everything except the contents. It's a nice little ship shape to sort of be like our ship Palo Alto, long, narrow, nice and rounded. Lots and lots of surface area for the buoyant force to push back on. This is full of cotton balls and air in the cotton balls. So we already know that light things tend to float, heavy things tend to sink, so no surprise when it floats. And it floats so well that the water only comes up to right about here, as if it's just touching. That buoyant force has no trouble lifting this bottle up. And buoyancy wins out over gravity when it's that lightweight. Now here's a second bottle. Now it's filled with something quite a bit heavier, dried pinto beans. So let's get it evened out, make sure our weight is distributed nicely. It's heavier. It's a lot heavier than the first bottle, But there's a lot of air in here, and there's air between the beams. So this is a little harder to think about. It's heavier, but there's still air in there, still the same shape, same surface area. What will happen with the buoyant force? It floats, but now it's floating much lower. The water is coming up over halfway up. It's becoming much harder for our buoyant force to lift this up and fight against gravity. Our last bottle is a lot heavier. It's packed with sand, and I do mean packed. It's dense. The material is very dense. There's almost no air between those little tiny bits of sand, but there's still air here. We still have lots of surface area. It's the same shape as all the other bottles, but it's dense, and it's heavier, and it's going to sink straight down. The buoyant force could not overcome the weight of this bottle. It pushed back, but gravity took over and down it went. All right. This entire bottle of beans, if you remember from just moments ago, floated. I'll just prove it again. Great, it floats. So, we have here one bean, one dried pinto bean. Same kind of beans. It's got sort of a flat, rounded shape, sort of like a hole. It's not very big. These all floated. What about one bean, straight down? Why? If you open this bean up, you're going to find more bean. Nothing but bean. No air pockets. It is dense. It is packed in there, packed in tightly, like the sand. So it's heavy for its size. And because of that, gravity grabs hold and drags it down. Two very different things. One small bean, one big buoy. And buoy, the first part of that, the word buoy is the first part of the word buoyancy, the buoyant force. Buoys are made to be lightweight. They're made to float. This is probably made of styrofoam. And because it's made to float, it floats. And yet it is many times bigger than the bean. But it's made out of a lightweight material that's full of air. It's got lots of surface area. So you have a lightweight item with lots of surface area for the buoyant force to lift up, not dense at all, and it floats like a charm. Okay. Displacement. That's another important thing we need to talk about. Displacement is when something takes the place of another item. In our case, the rock is going to replace some of the water. We're not going to ask if this floats. You know it's going to float. You crack this open, it's more rock, and it's heavy. But watch the water level. Right along here, you can watch the water level. The water level changes. It goes up. The water has had to get out of the way of the rock. It's been pushed aside. If you have an item that is heavier than the water that it's displacing, it's going to sink, and gravity wins. If you have an item that's even bigger but weighs less than the water that it displaces, it's going to float, which means that the Palo Alto, when it was launched into the San Francisco Bay, pushed a great deal of water away, and the Palo Alto weighed less than the water, so the buoyant force came along and lifted it up, and away it floated.
And here's a solid material. It's metal. You can hear it's metal. And it has an interesting shape. It's not exactly the shape of a boat, but we'll pretend that it is a boat. Now, it has an edge. It has a surface area. If I put this in the water like this, I think you can figure that it's probably going to sink. But let's try it. Sinks away. However, with all this surface area here, put it in this way, and it floats. My boat floats. How about that? Not only does it float, but it can carry things like a boat can. It can carry cargo. That's what stuff inside a boat is called, cargo. Well, let's see how much cargo my boat can carry. Well, we'll start with a rock. Here's a rock. Let's see. It's pretty heavy, and it's pretty solid. It's very dense. Oh, the boat carries that cargo easily. Here's some more cargo. Here's a golf ball. It falls. It's dense. Let's see if the ball will carry the cargo. That's a golf ball. Yes, of course it does. How about that? Well, we're going to try another rock. Not quite as big. Maybe this will sink my boat. Oh, it's still carrying. My goodness gracious me. And the golf ball, did I already put that in? Yes, I did. How about a ping pong ball? Is that going to sink it? Whoa. Well, let's see now. The bean is very dense. Let's see if the bean sinks the boat. No, the bean doesn't sink it either. All right, here we go with a block of clay. Let's see if this boat can carry all of these things plus a block of clay. By golly, it can. We're going to have to start over. Oh, here's a, oh, you can deal with this, right? Here's a piece of this clay that I made into the shape of a boat. Let's see. Oh no, it doesn't sink the boat. But what about if it's a solid piece of clay? Is it gonna sink my boat? Whoa, it still doesn't sink the boat. Oh my goodness. Let's try this piece of wood. Let's see, this is not very heavy, and it's not, it floats, we know it floats, but let's see if it sinks the boat. Oh, my boat is sunk. Oh my goodness. But look what didn't sink. This because it's got air in there, and this because it's wood and it's got air. How about that? Boats can carry a lot of stuff. This boat carries all of this stuff. And this is all really heavier than the boat. Isn't that something? Isn't that something?
Hi, welcome to Seacliff Beach Tide Pool Room. My name is Joyce Garvey, and I'm very glad to have you here today. And I just want to let you know what this funny thing is attached to my finger. That's my pointer that I will point to different animals and things I'd like you to look at in the tide pool. So outside on our beach, we have a very old, broken down ship. It's over 100 years old. It's called the Palo Alto. And a lot of people wonder why we don't just haul that thing away because it's all broken down and looks pretty bad. But the reason is it's actually a habitat for a lot of the animals here. A lot of the animals in our tide pool room came from the Palo Alto and the piers. So it maintains itself being a home for a lot of the animals that we have here. So our tide pool is very different than the one in Monterey. The one in Monterey, if you've been there, the sea comes into the tanks continually, whereas, and it's a touching tank, as you know, whereas our tide pool tank here is just a viewing tank. So again, I really hope that when we're able to have visitors again, that you're able to come and take a look at the different animals that we have. So let's take a look at a few words briefly about how they tie into the animals. The first word I want you to think about is the word tide pool. What does tide pool mean? What is a tide pool? Well, 4 times a day, the sea comes up into the sand or the rocky shore, forming small pools or ponds, either exposing or covering up animals and plant life. Now, the animals have to learn how to adapt in their environment or their new habitat. And a lot of times they have to really find ways to protect themselves from predators and from waves. Now, the waves bring microscopic plant life, which is, of course, very good for the animals. Adapt. What does adapt mean? Adapt means to change or modify behavior. So we'll learn how the animals have to adapt to survive. Habitat. What is a habitat? Well, a habitat is a home, and like we said, that Palo Alto is a habitat for animals. Your habitat might be Watsonville, San Lorenzo, Aptos. Habitat. Defenses. Defenses is how an animal protects itself, how it withstands the waves in the tide pool or protects itself from predators. Camouflage. What does camouflage mean? Camouflage is covering up or protecting itself, so they're very hard to see. So the first animal we're going to talk about in our tide pool is the sea star. And we have 2 types. We have the ochre, which is pink with a little bit of white spots on it. And they love to hang out by the filtration system with all the bubbles. It's kind of like a spa for them. And then we have bat stars, which are a little bit smaller. And what's really interesting about the sea star is that they have what are called rays. And one ray will start to lead, and the rest of the rays will follow. And if you take a look at the very tip of a ray, you'll see like a little whitish spot. Those are called eye spots. They're really not eyes, but they're sensors. And they help the animal to know if there is a predator, like a seagull, hovering over the tide pool looking for a tasty lunch. And that is really very helpful for them. Underneath the rays are little tube feet. And tube feet help the sea star move. Sea stars often eat clams and mussels. So what they like to do is to wrap their body around the rays, around a shell, and with the 2 feet pry it open, and then their stomach comes out from the inside of their body, believe it or not, into the shell, and then it digests the animal, and then its stomach comes back inside. The sea star breathes through its back. What do you breathe? That's right, through your lungs and mouth and nose. Well, the sea star breathes through its gills on its back. It looks a little bit like fur. The next animal we're going to talk about is the sea urchin. The sea urchin is purple. We have 2 of them. And they're very similar to sea stars in that they have an exoskeleton, meaning their skeleton is on the outside of their body. Where's your skeleton? Yeah, your skeleton's on the inside, so you have an endoskeleton. So the sea urchin has its back and its whole skeleton are made of plates that move. As you can see, it has little spiny spikes that will help it move. And if it needs to defend itself, it can roll away and get to attach itself. It has 2 feet, which also help it move, and the 2 feet can bring microscopic food and like little bits of fish and meat into its mouth. Sea urchins like to live in kelp beds. They love to eat, take their tongue and lick the nutrients off of kelp. And it's also, besides a home for sea urchins, it's also a home for sea otters. And sea otters love to eat sea urchins. Sea anemone. We have two different types of anemones. We have the giant green anemone. We have two of them. We're very fortunate to have two. And we also have very small little strawberry anemones, which grow in a cluster together. Now, sea anemones look a lot like a flower, and they have tentacles that, they're very beautiful, they flow in the water, but at the very end of the tentacles are little tiny capsules, which are stinging, and they can sting prey to paralyze it, and then those tentacles, if you notice, that can bring bits of food into the very center of the anemone in the mouth. Now, the anemone can do two things at one time. It can defend itself, and it also can camouflage itself. It has a stalk, what looks like a stalk, attached to a rock underneath the body. And a lot of times the stalk will have bits of shell attached to it. So when the sea anemone wants to protect itself, it can roll up into a ball, and it can roll away. And it also can look like the very bottom of the tide pool. So it's a kind of a 2-for-1 in terms of camouflage and in terms of defending itself. So these are just a few of the animals that we have in the tide pool, and I hope that you learned something today about animals in the tide pool, how they learn to survive and adapt to their environment. And thank you for coming today.